Asteroid of fear.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Men of the House podcast. And on today's episode, I have Alon Ferency, and we're going to talk about art, spirit, um, and maybe a little bit of everything in between. But I love this because my daughter goes to an arts academy.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and I played guitar for about 9 years and haven't played much in the past 18, but it's something I would like to actually pick up and enjoy again. And people can see in the video, I have some Marshall and Black Star amps behind me. And I've done some videos with my guitars in the pictures, and I've interviewed musicians as well. A lot about often with their struggle of like alcohol addictions and whatnot. And with one, it was even how, did you think giving up your addiction would impact your art and your ability to create art? And so I definitely want to touch on some of those points because what the audience doesn't know is you're also a rabbi, correct?
yes, and have some experience in addiction and recovery circles.
Perfect.
So
So
yeah, all of that.
I think there's like a lot to unpack there with viewpoints because um, there's a couple of sides and Um, yeah, yeah, I'm excited. So, all right, let's get it started. Let's give the audience a little introduction kind of about yourself, maybe where you grew up, and then I want to get into kind of your upbringing and what, did you always know you were going to be a rabbi? Did you want to do something else? What led you this way? And did kind of your experience around creativity, was that established in your youth? And did that carry on? And was it, kind of the rabbi path, the art path that kind of propelled you forward as you were, you know, going from, let's say, youth and adolescence into adulthood? And where did they meet up and how did they connect? So we can figure out how we ended up here and discussing it and how it's all relative to all the things we're going to talk about.
So I was born in upstate New York and grew up south of Boston.
Oh.
I don't know if I was shy, but awkward.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a committed Jewish household. I was gifted academically, awkward socially. I fancied and favored the nerd things like Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s and the band Rush and
Yeah.
Marvel Comics. Before any of those, back when those were things you kept to yourself. Stephen Colbert said, when we were children, you wanted to play D&D, you needed 3 friends who could keep a secret. So that's how I grew up. I always could hear and needed to work on listening. I needed to be a more attuned person and a less anxious person. I worked on that for decades. Art and Judaism were always part of my life. I think my story is a little bit like the story of Jonah. There was a clear calling to become a rabbi, and I avoided that as long as possible. I think of Jonah as the story of the person who wanted to be a sailor but wasn't a very good sailor. And had was supposed to be doing something else. So I tried a few other things first. I was very engaged Jewishly in my local synagogue community and youth groups, but then stepped away from it more in college and went into the Peace Corps, where I was really not active in any sort of faith tradition. Pardon me. Arts were always part of it. Arts. I was a stage actor since I can remember. I remember maybe a 3rd grade in-class play of Dr. Frankenstein and Friends that was in the textbook and being really excited to do that. Maybe that was the first time I was ever in a play.
Well, how did you come to kind of reconcile the feelings of being like very shy and socially awkward, yet you want to do like theater and drama and plays?
I'm not sure I was shy, actually. When you said that and I said it, I think it was just awkward. I think I wanted to be with people and didn't know how.
Or do you think it's like a little bit of kind of, I mean, like as a podcaster, I think any artist, maybe a little self-doubt and imposter syndrome. So maybe it's a little bit of
No. I
no.
didn't know how to talk to other kids. I think I At the time, maybe it mattered more than it does to me now. I was academically gifted. So you
Hmm.
put yourself on this track that a lot of people don't have the same vocabulary you do, literally or figuratively. You're not talking about the same thing. You're not thinking about the same things.
And
You're
the opportunities are different because I know, like, I've been kind of trying to figure this out in my head is, um, I think maybe I was gifted and then kind of tried to downplay it a little bit because, like, academically, because you're looked at differently and you feel differently as a child and you get different opportunities and
so I
you
watch
feel
my kids
bad.
do that, and I wish I knew to do that. I did
Yeah.
not know to keep it certain things to myself, right? And how to make myself blend with other kids.
But the thing is it might be a good thing because the long-term effects of that on me is kind of your value and self-worth, and then you have to go back and kind of through therapeutic means and asking yourself questions and looking inside, and you have to go, well, am I really up to my potential because I kind of played it safe, and then you fall into this
Do you
thing
think there was
because
like a flattening? Did you flatten your personality to make it mesh better?
um maybe I think so because I think I was definitely more quiet like in school, you know, at that time. But I think definitely I don't know if it's weird because yes, I definitely think I flatten my personality a little bit because then I think you kind of almost like secretly pursue your academia behind the scenes, probably like your
Mm.
Dungeons and Dragons, and you don't really tell anybody about it because you're gonna feel like like I can remember, like, let's say getting a distinguished freshman minority scholarship. I graduated high school a year early, but I ended up joining the Navy and then I got a full scholarship of active duty to go to college. So, but I can remember like never really telling people a lot of the stuff because it felt like, um, yeah, it was just kind of like you keep it to yourself because I didn't want other people to feel bad that they didn't maybe have the same thing that I had, I guess.
I think I've learned not to intentionally set myself apart.
Right.
There's so much about me that's quirky and odd and queer that keeps me on a different side than some
Hmm.
people that I don't need to add more to that problem. Right.
Yeah.
And I want to connect with people. I want to understand them. I want to be understood. That pointing out my academic career or my Peace Corps experience or any of the other sort of distinct experiences I had is only I don't need to impress people the way I used
Right.
to. I
Yeah.
think I used to use academic skill to impress people in a way that just pushed them away. So, circling back, I was into theater.
Hmm.
I always listened to music a lot. I think every chance I got from paper routes to grocery store money, I would spend on speakers and CDs. Once I had a Sega Genesis. That was probably my first purchase was a TV and a Sega Genesis. Um, but a lot of like passionate listening to music and buying CDs just on the off chance that it would be something that I would enjoy and trying to learn new music and explore that, especially music, concerts. I did theater until college, and then I auditioned my freshman year of college against, at least in my mind, I auditioned against someone who's so fabulously good, and I didn't get the part. I assumed everyone was that good. And looking back, I think it was Rashida Jones, the movie actress at
Oh,
the time.
wow.
So in my mind, that's the story I tell myself that I gave up acting because I auditioned opposite Rashida Jones and felt out of my depth. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. So I was doing that for a while. Um, I stopped doing theater for a while, but was still connected to arts scenes. Like after
Right.
after college, I was in the Peace Corps, and then I went to live in LA to work in the music business behind the scenes,
Okay.
recording studios, record labels, publishing companies, managed a band. I
Awesome.
don't think I was playing guitar very much myself. Probably
Right.
like you, it was in and out of my life. And recently, it's drums that I'm really enjoying, which is better for me because it's gross motor rather than fine motor. I think.
Yeah, well, and there's
Yeah.
also like a physical aspect. Like my brother-in-law, he's got a electronic drum set, and when we're over there, I take every opportunity
Oh,
to
it's
get on
fun.
it.
Oh,
Because
it's fun.
they're kind of quiet. It's not like your traditional drum set. Because I worked in like music stores as well. And yeah, they are fun and it's physical. I think it's great. I want
That's
my own, and I saw one, a girl my daughter or somebody my daughter goes to school with, one of the moms posted. She goes, "I just want this thing out of my house. Make an offer." But it was already sold by the time I
oh
saw it, and it was a perfect electronic drum set, and I was like, "Oh,
no, it's so much fun because it's a combination of like video game stuff that I love, which is hitting the button at just the right moment and dancing.
yeah."
Like it's to me, it's all the things I loved about dancing and all the things I loved about video
Well,
games.
you can
They're
feel
all
it. You feel it.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So, for me, and then college, I was a radio DJ, I was a jazz DJ.
Hmm.
I took ballroom and
What'd you
ballet,
major in undergrad?
Middle Eastern studies. No, I did
Okay.
not major. I wish I had. I kind of probed the edges of the arts.
Hmm.
I did a filmmaking class that I loved my last year in college.
Right.
Um, and by then it was too late to reorient my whole train of
Well,
study.
what made you choose that? Because like I mean, you said you kind of knew and avoided. Was that kind of
Oh God.
like this
Yeah.
is the practical side? Because I similarly, I I graduated early, had the scholarship. My parents wanted me to go to college. I didn't really want to go to college. I went to college for a semester and dropped out. I was more into like I wanted to do things. I joined the Navy.
Okay.
But afterwards, when I got out, because they were still like, they wanted me to go to college, but I was like, I want to do like, I always wanted to cook, play guitar, and do that kind of stuff. And so at that point, when I got out, I had this period of time where I was kind of in pursuit of that. And I always think like it's crazy because I think of the simplicity. Like I didn't need much. I didn't make a lot of money at that time. It was the mid 90s. And maybe at one point in time I was making 13 bucks an hour, which wasn't bad for the mid 90s, but as a cook. And so I was getting to explore art that way and then playing
Were
guitar
you
all
in
the
Texas
time.
then?
I was in Florida actually.
Florida. Okay.
Yeah, and so but it was this time of like simplicity because you know, I didn't need a lot because my days were filled with like wake up, work out, play guitar, maybe read a book, watch a movie, just do things. It was more like engaging or going to like $5 reggae night at the surf club or something
Sounds
on a
great.
Wednesday.
That sounds like
So
your 20s. I mean, that's
yeah, but
my 20s were fun.
it was that whole like, but I had that the parent on the practical side going college, 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 college. And it wasn't until I was like cooking, which is kind of an art form as well. It was like I we had a guy who was a sous chef in the AM at another restaurant, and then he would come in the PM and work the saute station. And he was 45, worked two jobs, trying to send his daughter through college. And I was in my young 20s, and I was like, I don't know that I want to be 45, working two jobs, sweating over a kitchen. So I ended up um basically going back and getting my undergrad. So I kind of eased into that practicality of going, I'll
What did
just
you
get my
study as an
basics.
undergrad? What did you wind up going back
Um,
for?
just general studies. And then when I did that in Palm Beach Community College for 2 years, and I didn't know that I would really um, go any further, but then kind of a breakup ensued. And then I moved back to Texas and I started working in an emergency room. And within that emergency room, I just kind of found that passion for what I have for people and then ended up going kind of pre-med major.
Okay.
Like, so that kind of practical bit, but I did health and kinesiology as an undergrad because it gave me the elective room to take, like, I could take like anatomy and physiology or your kinesiology type stuff, exercise physiology. But then it had this wiggle room where I could take like healthcare law, but then I could go back. I I had a professor who was just awesome, Dr. Destroyfort, and he was a literature professor and he did the classics, so like Rome and all that during that time. And so I can remember taking multiple classes for him, and I can remember feeling this need of balance because I just come from this cooking, playing guitar all the time. And now I'm kind of going into a practical direction. I'm in my mid 20s now. I'm considering growing up and um but I did always find it important to kind of balance like that pre-med curriculum with classics, music, art appreciation, literature, and those tended to be some of my favorite things. And I kind of went down this practical path and have now circled back to what I consider partially creative and partially uh, practical because all the things I've done in my past have allowed me, interviewing people for jobs. It ties into this.
Mhm.
But, you know, in terms of mixing art with connection and the things that are important to me on that practical side of why I wanted to help people, because I ended up in healthcare management anyway, in
Okay.
healthcare for 12 years. So, that practical part did stay a part of my life, but it's just recently been realized for me through the layoff that really this kind of more mixture and less stringent on this side is the better balance for me in terms of being more fulfilled. Or maybe I'm just arriving where I need to be finally, you know.
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
The what the soul is crying for and what the world demands of us are not always the same, not always aligned.
Yeah, so why did you go into Middle Eastern studies? Was that practical piece of it?
It was the 90s. There was a lot of optimism around Israel and Palestine.
Hmm.
I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to learn about the region more deeply. I'd lived in Israel and experienced work with Palestinians as well by that point. So I focused at that point. The department was heavily classics oriented, but I focused on a lot of modern economic development between
Hmm.
the two peoples. Um, all those hopes and dreams
Yeah.
decayed and eventually fell apart. And I think I realized unless I was on the ground in a political position, there wasn't much I
Hmm.
could do from afar.
Right.
But I worked sometimes, some summers in DC and Tel Aviv with organizations, nonprofit and governmental organizations to build economic linkages.
Hmm.
And then from there, so I think it was just a heady time for the
Yeah.
Near East. That was right after Oslo. My freshman year was Arafat and Rabin shaking hands.
Hmm.
I remember, being in my freshman dorm, watching it happen and being overwhelmed by the whole experience. And then junior year was when Rabin was killed. So it was timing, especially, and personal connection. And I'd always wanted to learn Arabic. I knew some Hebrew. I wanted to learn Arabic. I wanted to learn more about the region, both for personal and philosophical and religious reasons, but also just because
Right.
I always wanted to explore cultures and always wanted to be a leader across cultures. Um, and it seemed practical, which it isn't practical at all. I don't know why it seemed practical then.
Well, because they
Whereas
offered
going
it,
into
but we're in different
yeah,
times, our views on what's important in education has shifted drastically
right.
from the time, we started college to now.
And I think I also looked at like music classes, and I was already out of my depth. There were kids who had been composing music and orchestral music from every summer since they were ninth grade. Right. So
Right.
they had ear training. They could play keyboard to compose. I would go into those early music theory classes and be just out of my depth and overwhelmed. And I could have pushed through, but I was young and naive and not ready for that.
Right.
I had a band for about 5 weeks. That was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. What did you play?
Rhythm guitar. And I
Okay.
can still sing a bit. My favorite, sort of artistic approach, the three things that I really loved was dance. So I did a little ballet and a little ballroom. Being a jazz DJ, I fell in love with jazz, and I've always loved being a DJ at parties.
Uh-huh.
And then filmmaking my last year, just especially because then it was exposure to 16 millimeter film. It wasn't video.
Right.
It was tangible, and it was like solving a puzzle when you edit, physical film.
Hmm.
And then I went on a bike trip from Seattle to Boston with a college friend and some friends of theirs. Went into the Peace Corps in Cameroon, came back, worked on a presidential campaign, did some substitute teaching, moved to LA to work in the music business, which was, I learned a lot. I was miserable. I went broke. I was knee deep in some problematic and compulsive behaviors like promiscuity. I was lonely. I was scared. I was learning about myself. I got re-engaged in my religious practice.
Hmm.
I did some volunteer work. I love LA. I hiked a lot. I biked a lot, the good and bad.
Right.
And
Feels like you
now,
came to understand that these things were maybe no longer serving you and you had to go deep within. And especially when you're in that crisis place and you don't have a lot, both spiritually or physically or monetarily, like the biking, the hiking is kind of, it's free, but it also serves this purpose of, you know, sorting out all
yeah,
these
yeah,
feelings.
yeah. I mean, I think I was probably confronting biological issues like depression that I later
Mhm.
needed to address medically.
Right.
Um, and my parents their marriage was changing, and that was very stressful. So that was a really difficult time with a lot of bad choices on my part. Nothing with any permanent, criminal
Right.
record or consequences, but just
Same
a sad
here.
and lonely time.
I'm thankful that that never happened for me.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
I say sometimes by the grace of God that only how I've lived through some of the things that I've done and
Yeah. No
not
scars,
ended up
no major diseases, and
no
no prison record,
incarceration,
no
no
incarceration.
record.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a
Um,
miracle.
but got to have some incredible experiences. Like I went to a party at Rick Rubin's house.
Oh
I
wow.
saw bands as they were coming out, bands like the White Stripes and Coldplay were coming out. I remember where I was when I would first hear them. I would scout bands. I would learn. I got to work in a recording studio that I had no idea what a great recording studio was because I was just miserable.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of opportunities that I didn't make the most of because I was too vain or arrogant or pigheaded at the time. So I come back to Boston to be with my parents for the summer, moved to New York to get a master's degree in Jewish education, meet my wife, did some chaplaincy studies. So like you, I
Mhm.
spent some time in hospitals, but on the other side of the fence with the chaplaincy corps,
Right.
um, the non-medical parts of the hospital.
Well, and I worked for Catholic organizations, and
Oh,
the one that I worked for the second time was actually founded by some of the sisters in Poland. And so, from the mission statement to everything, it was very, the sisters rounded through the hospital daily.
which hospital
Very,
was this? Was this
um,
in Florida
Texas.
or?
This is in Texas. So I worked in two. I worked at Seton, which is part of Ascension Healthcare in Austin,
Okay.
and then I worked at it is now Christus Health, but it used to be called Mother Francis Hospital, and it's the hospital I was born at. And my
It's pretty
mom's been
cool.
there for 38 years. Um, yeah, so it's kind of like a little family business, but very much so that those you you were very used to seeing that. And then one of the A schools I went to in the Navy, we also had religious program specialists. We went to the same school at the same base. And that was kind of one of these things when I look back and you go, wow, I didn't know that they had these religious program specialists who assist, whether it's pastors, rabbis, whatever, and actually go out potentially into combat and
These are like
administer
naval
lessons.
chaplains.
Yeah, but they're like
Chaplaincy.
a kind of assistants to them and they
Okay.
help the chaplains and do whatever. So, yeah, I've kind of been I think, familiar with uh both like what I'm doing personally and kind of a religious aspect surrounding it.
What would you say your spiritual life is like these days? If you don't mind.
I, I would say strong, but I personally have because I'm working on a lot of things. I would say I would I would venture to say that I've never been stronger in faith and practicing more in terms of, daily scripture passages and journaling and praying, meditating. And, it's something I've always known from a very young age. I've always felt like I knew there was something, but I grew up in a very small Baptist town. My
Okay.
mom was Catholic. My dad was Baptist. She was Mexican. He was white. This was the 60s. It was not very popular in a very small white Southern Baptist area. And I always knew, but my parents never kind of forced it on me. And I was burned seriously as a child. And so they baptized me, but they never forced me to do Catholicism things and said that once I could make my own decision, I could. But I can remember always having this awareness of feeling like I didn't like necessarily the organized religion because I felt like people were hypocritical. It was just very obvious in a small place of the people maybe you see like you're a freshman or something and you see people who have cars who are ahead of you and maybe they go to pasture parties or they're out drinking and they're doing fornicating and whatever and they think, oh, I can just because oh, but I go to church every Sunday, so that makes it okay. And I intrinsically knew that was not okay with me. It just didn't align. It didn't match. And so I always kind of had this problem in a way, this conflict of knowing what I knew and felt versus what I saw, what it was, and what other people displayed to me. And then I was very definitely reconnected to my faith in boot camp because it was an
Oh,
opportunity to get out. But you're separating. I was graduated at 16. I was in the Navy at 17, my first time away. Um, but I wanted to get away. So it was semi-stressful, but not. And I was kind of going processing stuff because my dad and I were at kind of odds a little bit. And, and then, I had some things happen to where I made poor choices and did things that were kind of against the core belief of my spirituality and kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I could never be forgiven. I'm such a horrible person. And I think that's what really kind of propelled me off the practical into the more artistic guitar, um, chefing, um, drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, all of it.
all
But
those good things. They're all good things. Those are all,
yes,
yeah.
but interesting.
Food, music, drugs, rock and roll, sex.
But
Yeah.
interestingly enough, during that time, it's so interesting because I still had this kind of moral kind of thing. I can remember going 3 years celibate during that time, during that crazy time, but out of choice because I was like, I don't know, I just didn't feel like it would add anything. I felt like I I intrinsically knew there needed to be a connection, that that's what made it what it's supposed to be. And so, that was kind of a thing. So I think I was still always struggling. And then I've kind of had these periods back and forth where I know I struggle, I know, and I struggle and I know. And then I think I'm just finally to this point where I kind of, in this latest pursuit of what I've had to kind of shed and step into is that, I know it's about my personal relationship and my faith is my faith. It, you know, I don't have to
Does
show
it
it off to
does it fit
anyone.
in any particular box? Would you still consider yourself Christian or Catholic
Yeah, I
rather?
would say Christian, not Catholic.
Not necessarily Catholic.
Yeah, no. But but yeah, I think it's definitely yeah. And also during that time, those years in Florida. So through that full scholarship, I had went to University of Florida. I dated a girl. Her best friend was Jewish. And growing up in a small Baptist town, I had never met a Jewish person.
Right.
I only knew the meaning, literally. I promise you, Jew them down. That's all I knew about Jewish.
Oof. Yeah, that's rough.
That's wild. And so
Yeah.
then I go to um, their friends. I end up becoming friends with the boyfriend of the Jewish girl, and his best friend is Jewish, and that's how I end up in Boca Raton with a Jewish roommate. And then I learned a lot because I would go to Passover and all the stuff with him, and um, yeah, and so it was interesting, and that was during that time too that I was kind of celibate. He was not, and 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 so you can see where all these things clash when you go,
There's a lot
what?
of ingredients in the stew
Yes,
struggling to be tasted, you know? And
yeah.
so your spirituality doesn't neatly fit in a Catholic or Christian context, but what what part of it now do you think is connected to arts making, creativity, including cuisine and guitar?
Well, what is life? I mean, so yesterday I spent time with people who were important to me, connecting in conversation, and that in some shenanigans, some dancing on TikTok to a funny song. And I remember posting it and going, this is where life happens. This is the magic. And so, you know, whether you're making music, food, you're satisfying something that's more soul oriented. You get this automatic feedback. There's a feeling associated with it. You're making people happy because I'm a people pleaser and a server to a detriment to my own self. But I think that um, those things are giving. They're giving, they're serving, they're part of what makes life life. Like if I can cook your anniversary dinner with you and your wife of 50 years and it was great and it made it special, that's, that's what life is about this conversation, about connecting, learning about one another. It's not about all these things and sometimes things we do. And I think, remembering that kind of to slow down and um, connect with people
Yeah.
and serve people and be kind. And because that's how I have a saying like, go out and be the person you want to meet, and if you just do that, then, I think the world would be a better place. We fight over what's different versus we all have similar struggles.
Let me ask a couple of questions because you're the first person I've talked to sort of in terms of the creativity of cuisine.
Hmm.
Like my wife's a great cook. I've known good cooks, but the understanding of the artistry of it. And like, actually, you're not the first person I've thought about with this, but the cliche that the cook comes out of a desire to nourish people.
Hmm.
And you talk about serving people. What is the spirituality of the kitchen? Like where do you see that? There's
Hmm.
that creativity of the blending of ingredients, the creating experience. And you're talking about something soul nourishing when you talk
All
about
of it.
yourself. All
So
of it.
well, so there's different components. So there's your piece, whatever dish you're cooking, or I worked expo a lot, which is timing, putting it all together, making it happen, making it come out perfect. But that was also this teamwork, this communication factor, and being in the military, working in kitchens. Um, it's like a Friday or Saturday night. It's gonna suck. It's gonna be busy. Like it's like preparing to be kicked in the balls per se. You can't really. It's not gonna feel good, and you know it. You can't really prepare for it. You just got to
Can't
take
really
it.
prepare to be kicked in the groin, no matter. No,
So, but the difference
it's
is,
not
is
it's not something you can prepare for.
yeah, what makes it special is a Saturday night with the right people that you've built relationships with. And when it, like a band that is on and in rhythm and in cadence, and what that looks like in the energy and vibe it produces in the kitchen when it goes off without a hitch, when it's tough, but you still win and you feel the camaraderie afterwards. So it, just like at a concert, or if you've ever jammed with somebody and it clicks and it vibes, it's like, oh, this
That
is,
is fun.
yeah,
That is fun. That flow.
you get more, like I would always get more feeling out of um listening to the other person jam, like whether they're playing a solo or the bass line. Like a friend of mine, he's a great bassist. I get more like feeling out of like what he's playing, the rhythm of it.
Yeah.
And so it's like the kitchen is the same way. So there's a piece of it like, you know, how you treat your ingredients. Don't burn them. Put them on the right spot on the grill. How you do anything is how you do everything. So it's like the treatment of the ingredients, how you plate it, how clean you do it. Do you treat the process with respect? And then the teamwork aspect, which is part of connecting with others and part of kind of a spirituality of um, together we can do hard, we can get through hardships together. And while it still may be have been hard, we were still victorious, and it feels great to be victorious. And I believe in good over evil. And so, being kind to each other and figuring out togetherness is like, you know, the world could be in a way better place.
You're really selling it. I've been always afraid to work in a kitchen. I always thought it was extremely hard.
It is, and
But
it
it's
can
that kind
be.
of like camaraderie and collaboration and attention and flow. And then it has the rhythm of a church service, what you're describing a little bit.
Yeah, church music, concert, jamming, like
Yeah.
it's either it's either really bad, okay, and a struggle, or really good and magical. And if you can shoot for the magic, and when you experience it,
How often does that happen in a good kitchen? Once a month? Once a night?
um, it I think like any situation, I think it depends on turnover.
Mm.
And crew, because you're going to work different shifts. So it kind of depends on the configuration. If you're picking up a morning shift and you're normally with the night crew and you don't gel with this person, and because it can be very toxic, there can be a lot of cursing and, hey, meet me out back by the freezer and we're gonna duke it out. Like,
A lot of
yeah,
drugs too, is my impression of kitchens.
partially. Partially somewhat. There's some alcohol driven, but it's very culturistic of. And that was the mid 90s, late 90s. So I think kind of like rock and roll, it was very sex, drugs, rock and roll oriented. I mean, when you're prepping, we had the 100 disc changer and people bring in their favorite disc and you put on and everybody jams out and you got the music on the line. But then you can better believe that when you get done that you're having drinks, maybe smoking a joint or going, we had a bar down the road from our place that had like open mic and stuff all the time. And it would be open till 5 in the morning. So, you could get off at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning and still go out for drinks and get crazy for 3 hours and walk home. So yeah, it was kind of a little bit of debauchery, but um yeah, I think kitchens have definitely morphed, and now that they're more front facing, you have Top Chef and all these cooking competitions. And I think just like generational of how women have evolved all this time while men have kind of been doing the same thing, and now men are ready, like more is expected of us in the world, and we're not just expected to be providers and doers, but emotionally intelligent and emotionally available and sensitive to our partners and the rest of the world even.
Good
And
communicators, period. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's, if you look at all these things, I was having a conversation with a guy last night. Like if you think about how men and women have worked together, I mean, I can remember having a first few female cooks on the line with me. And, they were different from the ones who traditionally served and hosted. Um, but, if we've only really been doing this maybe 30 years, like where women are being CEOs and really pushing the boundaries, in the, you know, time in general, it's really a small blip. We haven't perfected it.
Uh,
And so,
Absolutely. I mean, I
yeah,
think there's so much to work on in human nature,
yeah.
period. Always, all the time, forever.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's, and so I think kitchens, you know, I think one of the marks I could ask myself is, would I want one of my three daughters, any of my three daughters to work in a kitchen now? And yeah, I would be comfortable with it. I would tell them, but I think there's probably been some evolution, but I still definitely do think it's a very similar to musicianship. It's kind of like ragtag pirates, like, they were never, because these were never thought of practical fields in the 90s, I think, when we were coming up. This was always like, you couldn't be a comedian. No, you couldn't be a musician. No, you couldn't be an actor. You need to go to school and you need to do this. This
Right.
is the path to success and guarantee certainty. But, being laid off 4 years ago with a master's degree from a $7 billion healthcare organization, there is no certainty. So,
There never was. There never was.
right. But but you can see now though how much is changed and how, musicians don't necessarily have to go to Tower Records anymore and do this thing. They can put their own stuff on Spotify. They can be independent. You can be a comedian, don't have to live in LA or New York. You can live wherever. And, you know, so yeah, it's just the same way women to CEOs and all, the mind shifted of what's possible has just evolved and changed. And I think that kind of makes the art form of it more acceptable. Because
So
if you
we're,
notice, a lot of chefs have tattoos too, and
yeah,
very
yeah.
much art driven.
So where is art and creativity expressing itself in your life now? Where is that part of your soul coming out?
Writing.
Are you writing?
Well, I journal,
Okay.
but I would say in a way with ideas. Um, I have a chapter of a book, and I'm working on doing that kind of to go with the podcast. Um,
Fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction. It would be the Men of the House podcast started as a book, which I got a chapter of, then it was a blog. But this was all prior to podcasting, and now it's a podcast, but I don't think I had all the pieces of the story and picture to have completed a book then. And I think part of this last 4-year transition that I've gone through metamorphosis is I feel like I have the substance to delve into that. Because actually, creative writing was one of those elective courses I took in undergrad as well. Why I got the Associate of Arts at Palm Beach Community College, I took creative writing, art, music, literature. Yeah, it was, other than the English and stuff I had to take, it was definitely all art focused. And I can remember creative writing being one of my favorite classes. That was like 95, 96. No, probably 96, 97.
Are you returning to it now, or has that always been part of your life for decades in between?
I think it's always been part because, yeah, I think, man, uh, this is where podcasting gets interesting, but the only way, uh, the only way sometimes is through, and sometimes you just got to put it out there. But no, I think I'd always been a writer. Um, I, there was a crazy phase in my life, and I used to have a girlfriend who would request for me to handwrite her erotic stories. And this was prior to the creative writing class. So yeah,
That's very
this was
that's
before, this is the 90s. This is pre-internet
I,
and all that stuff.
my first girlfriend, before we were dating, I wrote her an erotic email. It was very early in the days of email too. She didn't know what to expect because it was like the second email she had received in her life, probably at that point.
Yeah, so it's wild
Yeah.
when
You
and I
would
never really,
handwrite them too.
yeah, yeah. I
That's
never thought
very,
of it till you asked me that question,
oh,
but
that's very romantic and
yeah, yeah.
it's, in a spicy way. I like that. I like that a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, but growing up during that time as, young boys, whether it's Playboy and or Penthouse, your first visual nudity experiences. And, they had, I don't know what they were, but some of them had articles or letters. And
Yeah, oh, penthouse
so,
letters. We
yeah,
all
yeah,
knew them at summer
yeah,
camp. You knew them at summer camp.
yeah.
And at the time,
So,
you're like, oh, this really happened.
and
This is
that's
not the editor
probably,
of the magazine writing this garbage.
but that's probably why or where I got these ideas. Probably a combination of that, but I'd also been in the military and been overseas and been to other countries and experienced other cultures, if you will, sexually and stuff like that. And so I'm sure between young men reading and of course doing what I did, all the men in the squadron, all their Playboy subscriptions came to the squadron, so their wives had so they had stuff to go for the boat, some boat material
Yeah. Yeah.
when you go on deployment. But so yeah, it was very much like when I look at all that.
Yo, word up. This is Ethan from the Nonchalant Perfectionist podcast. I'm so glad you tuned in here, man. Hold on, just real quick. Did you know that this podcast, as well as my own, are part of a much larger world called the Podcast Connection Network? Yeah. Yeah, we have some pretty amazing shows hosted by even more amazing souls. And look, we're just waiting to be discovered. You curious? Yeah, I know you are. Head over to the link in the description below. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
You know, you can see that kind of the creativity, that part of it, the writing, and whether I attribute it to more of an artistic endeavor or, because you and I both confessed to saying we were good academically, was it just from an academic point of view, proficiency, or was it really creative and using imagination and what you
I
brought
think it's a
together?
great sort of origin story for creativity. I mean, we are impelled by hormones at a certain age, and to
Right.
transmute them into pen and paper erotica. And there's a lot worse ways that can go. Having a 13-year-old boy and imagining the things he could be doing in his room at any moment now.
True.
Like if he were writing pen and paper erotica to a girl he fancied, I would find that charming and very sweet.
I wonder
So
where those handwritten letters are
especially
now.
if it was consensual, which it sounds
Yeah.
like,
She requested it.
yeah, I wonder if you could find them and, sift through them and find if there's a meat there for something for some future writing.
Yeah.
I think, there's, and this idea, Carlos Santana talks about it, the candy cane, right? The red and the white. I think he talks about spirituality and sensuality, or spirituality and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem sometimes with organized religion, is that it tries to divorce those things. But spirituality, sensuality, creativity, reverence, and irreverence are so inextricably linked. Right? That sense of humor, sense of drive. I mean, so I've done some writing in theology, and my first mentor, we had a lot in common in terms of our thought processes, but he didn't believe in the soul. He was, I'm a rationalist, and the one exception is that I actually think we do have a soul. And I said to him, well, you need to listen to more James Brown. Because I think when James Brown, in Superbad, when he talks about, I got soul and I'm super bad, I've got something that makes me want to shout, like that's the soul. That is the motive force within us that is both sexual and reverent and irreverent and irrepressible and strong and harmonious. Like that's what makes all art. That's where the best stuff comes from. And scripture too. I think scripture is these soulful questions of, why are we here? What are we supposed to do with our time? What is love? How are we supposed to construct family and community lives?
What are you to hold important? And that's, that while I do read daily scripture, it's kind of broken down. I don't know that I've read the Bible in totality, but
not all of it is equally good.
I wonder
some things.
But it just strikes me that if you can appreciate like architecture of the classics, or I was in downtown Fort Worth not too long ago, and there's like these buglers on the side of a theater, and it's just majestic, like carved out of stone or however they made it. And it's, and I think of like, when you think of the Bible, you think of ancient things. And when you sometimes think of ancient things, you think of hand and stone. And how did they do all this? Because it was so much more difficult. And, with your background, how do you correlate kind of those two with like, where does like visualizing the beauty of art fit into like religion for you? Is it meant there? Was it put there to be
I think you're into a spiritual area that's hard for me, because it was hard for me to integrate those parts of my life.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard as a pulpit rabbi who is sort of an advocate for a very specific tradition. And I wasn't in an Orthodox or fundamentalist congregation, but still, to say that I get as much spiritual meaning out of Shakespeare and James Baldwin and John Coltrane as I do out of Leviticus and Deuteronomy and the Psalms more and less. It was very hard to say that I can be as inspired by Guernica and Picasso
Right.
as by the descriptions of the altar in Leviticus, or the stories of Jacob, or to make the comparison that the end of Deuteronomy and Moses' death is similar to the end of Blade Runner. And the idea of, tears and rain, that we are all sort of ephemeral. Those are things I'm comfortable speaking now, not 100% comfortable, but do feel even now 90%, 10% awkward, admitting that to me, there were things in Shakespeare that were better than things in the Bible. And I remember in an interview for seminary, the interviewer asking, do you think the Bible is a great book or the great book?
Oh.
And I thought it was a great book, but I knew he wanted me to say the great book. And now, so transitioning out of the pulpit work in the past 2 years towards direct service with artists and other spiritual seekers,
Mm-hmm.
I can be more candid, because I think Bible, like poetry, like other forms of human expression, is an effort to understand and to grasp what is important and what is beyond and what is within us.
Agreed.
But it is not the thing that is within us. It is not. Scripture points toward God, but Scripture is not of God. It is a story of human beings trying to understand. Just in the same way that A Love Supreme by John Coltrane is a story of 4 human beings one evening trying to get closer to God.
Well, and when you said trying to understand, like with podcasting, part of the reason in doing this is to share my stories, my struggles, those of others, to document them, to have some documentation history for generations after, to, hey, this is what my grandfather was about or whatever, or great grandparents. But it's to let other people know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
So they can kind of understand, which is, when you mention that religion, the book and scripture, and going and understanding, but also through music, musicians, they're, a lot of heartbreak songs, expression about the feeling of that, but other people seek out that expression to feel not alone, which is that understanding of self, which is similar to, we're trying to understand with religion kind of where we fit into it. We try to understand religion, but then how we are supposed to immerse within that, or yeah.
I would say that I would not be here today and have made it through certain dark nights of the soul were it not for certain albums, certain rabbis and Jewish professionals, other Jewish professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 6, which is about a bleak night of the soul. Knowing that other people went through these things and put them to tape or put them to psalms or put them to music. Like that gets me through hard nights. There's an album, British folk singer Nick Drake. He turns in his last album. It's just him recording, I think, 10 tracks in a hotel room with an engineer. Get him and guitar. And I don't know if the piano, there's one part that has a piano, maybe added later. The album's called Pink Moon. And that feeling, that late night alone feeling, being able to pop on those albums so that, yes, it's late night and I'm alone and maybe I'm in despair or just lonely, but I wasn't the first and I won't be the last, and people have made it through worse. And those kind of experiences, but without just going down one avenue of darkness, like even the experiences of joy and transformation and the sublime,
mm-hmm.
right? To see Joseph Turner, the paintings of Joseph Turner, which are filled with this kind of glorious light, the kind of light that the Jewish tradition talks about is the primordial light. Like,
mm-hmm.
Oh, this guy gets it, right? Like this guy sees something that's not there, that we want to be there, that we can't completely perceive below the surface of events.
Right.
Or, Da Vinci's painting of Saint Anne and Mary and Jesus, and that sense of like a family together in intimacy and the joy and tenderness of parenthood. To know that that exists, and to know that, and what's great about art for me and scripture to an extent is it transcends the words. Like I keep thinking of that. You've seen Blade Runner, I'm guessing, because
Long time ago.
the last scene where the final replicant died, played by Rutger Hauer, and it's a famous speech called "Tears in Rain."
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that scene. I mean, there's words to it, and he improvised most of it, but it's about something. But I can't put it into words. Is it regret, nostalgia, grief, love, satisfaction? It's all those things and more. And if you were to try to write that out in some sort of prose way, it would be very flat. Yeah. But you watch that scene and his acting in that scene, and you sense, this deeper bond to all life in a way that can't be put into words.
I just had this weird, crazy, like off the wall, like I've always loved film, and movies have been a thing. I love podcasting. I love music. I'm going to a show Friday. I'm on a podcast now.
What are you seeing on Friday?
I'm seeing the Mad Caddies and Ballyhoo, which are kind of like reggae beach, reggae rock beach, and then also some kind of ska horns.
Okay.
I'm very much into, I love horns and big band and swing. Like when I was 6 years old, Brian Setzer. Yep, from the Stray Cats. Stray Cats was my first album at 6. But yeah, I've seen Brian Setzer Orchestra live.
That's not the original Stray Cats. That's Stray Cats was the original. That's a cover by Brian Setzer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I don't. I lost my train of thought for a second.
You were having a thought. You said, "I'm sorry, I did interrupt you because I was
curious."
No.
Yeah, here it was the when you were talking about the scene and you talk about the words, but then you talk about, I think about the rain, the visual aspect of it, and then there's always something in the background, whether it be music, and I was like, I'm like, you're engaging every form of art at once.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know if that's, I don't know, because there are some great movies, but I don't know that I have thought about them like that deeply of maybe why I enjoy them, or, do you feel like there was more effort put into movies in the 90s? Like, because were there better movies? Were there less great movies?
There have always been bad movies. I mean, there have always been good movies.
And it's kind of gone through phases of like rom-coms and funny stuff.
I think there's always been bad movies and always good movies. I think what I'm kind of thinking about more is just the ways in which art expresses things that are just very hard to describe.
And when you put all three together, that's what makes the scene and gives it the meaning. So that was the kind of the point, and I just realized it in the moment, putting all three of the art together.
Of the elements of the visual and the oral and the words.
All at the right
storytelling,
time. All at the right moment.
I mean, it's quite a skill to be able to pull that off.
Like somebody who can draw. Artists, like who can, from their head, I've known some very left-handed talented artists. I don't know why left-handed people can usually draw, but
interesting.
Some of them, the ones that I've met, and how they can take something so in depth and detailed in their brain and put it on a piece of paper. To me, I don't know if the awe comes from the fact that I can't do it, and I'm humble enough to recognize that not only is it a special skill, but it might be a skill that's a gift that's handed down from something bigger that makes this universe what it is, just like a Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix. It's like, yeah, I have chills just thinking of their names because I've known like what they've meant to me and wanting to play guitar, the influence and how hard it is and the magic behind that. And
are you listening to Khruangbin these days, being from Texas and a guitarist?
Listening to what?
Khruangbin, the trio from Texas that plays sort of Thai funk.
No, I need to
Oh,
check that
oh, he's
out.
Mark Spear is their guitarist. I think he's the best thing since Hendrix, actually. I
Oh
think
man,
he's just phenomenal.
I'm gonna have to check that out because I'm
Yeah.
always like, I
Khruangbin. They are the bee's knees. They're what I keep going back to these days.
man,
Just in terms of
yeah,
transcendent and sort of like incredible playing, but also just setting a mood, sharing an experience, telling a story without words.
hmm
Yeah.
yeah. I well, what coming how being a religious authority figure as a rabbi, how did how does the church feel about some of this? What is their view or kind of take from your or what do you think or is it shifting or what is their view on art?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the problem is less dogma in synagogues and
Mhm.
more um, conservatism and getting stuck in your ways, right? Being unable to move into the future in the way that a lot of religious communities are getting overwhelmed by change.
Mhm.
And so I did have to step down from the pulpit to do what I want to do. I don't think, and I think that's just institutions in general.
Right.
Institutions start perpetuating themselves and believing their own hype and thinking that they should continue doing what they've always done, maybe a little bit better, when sometimes a departure is necessary.
Yeah, well, I say this often as I go institutions like corporations, you call it
Yeah.
anything big, they start off to service something noble and true. But somewhere in there, it just gets so far from what it ever started to be. There was always good intentions to develop these institutions, to move things forward, be it spirituality, thought, skills, health, um, you're making people better. But it like a snowball, it just gets so crazy and like anything, like a snowball rolling, it's going to pick up some dirt. It's going to pick up some debris,
Interesting.
and it
Yeah.
may it may never wear down enough that that gets out of there, and it just erodes it, and it never it never turns into what it could be, you know? And so yeah, I
I don't
find
know
it
about what it could be. It just can't see the future anymore. It to an
it's like
extent.
lost potential.
Yeah. Well, to an extent, it's when David Geffen had Asylum Records, he was scouting people himself, signing Joni Mitchell.
Mhm.
And when he went to start Geffen Records, he knew his ears weren't in tune anymore. So he got younger people to scout, to find, I think, Nirvana. And I think the same thing also plays out in terms of indie record labels and large labels, right? You have these indie labels like Sub Pop or Secretly Canadian that are finding sort of interesting things going on that a
Right.
large label like Universal doesn't have the antenna for.
Mhm.
And so I think sometimes institutions have to be reinvented, not necessarily from within, but by a smaller upstart. Right? You have, even in business, you see
It
this.
shows a different way of doing it.
Right. Right. You have a small institution that is piloting a new way of doing it. And maybe Google or Microsoft buys out that small institution and becomes a
Yeah.
division of Apple. But sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes the big groups, the institutions, the firms, the synagogues, the churches just have too much at play. The
Groupthink.
budget's too big. There's too much overhead
When you get
to take the
groupthink,
risks. Yeah. Yeah. Or just risk avoidance, even, or short sightedness, because you're busy serving who's already there in a
yeah.
synagogue or a
Well,
church.
because uh yeah. So there's so many parallels. Like if you look at so like you talk about the record business and like I think about this because I'm from the 90s and my first concert was like Guns N' Roses when Metallica opened for Guns N' Roses, the Use Your
No.
Illusion tour. Yeah. Faith No More was the first opening act at Texas Stadium, then it was Guns N' Roses then Metallica and James had burned his arm in Canada. So they had a guitar tech playing, and then Guns N'
They had a
Roses.
guitar tech playing James's part.
Yep.
That's a wow. That guitar tech
So
must have been shitting his pants.
he,
That's a heavy lift.
maybe he knows it. Maybe he was a virtuoso, but when you look at
Wow.
it, you have this art, and then you have these people who they love the art. They want to expose the art. Their intention is purely towards the art, just like hospitals are developed to help people. But then there then it becomes money, and you talk about this risk averse, money becomes involved. Then you have business people and then artists, business people, artists. And then these are always looking at this and these are always looking at this. And the hospitals, it's like you have doctors who go to school because they want to help people. And then you have administrators and the business people who are like, you need to see 22 patients a day minimum because we don't make any money for the first 18. We're not going to survive. What did you think this was going to be like? And I was that person. You need to see more patients. Um, and That's why I never wanted to be a doctor. That's taking healthcare law. I knew I would never be able to be the person I wanted to be because there was going to be somebody, the person I ended up becoming, that wasn't going to let you do it. And
Yeah.
it's the same of what you hear with musicians. I mean, I interviewed Kyle Smith, who's one of my favorite reggae rock musicians, who's struggled and just incredible. And, in that interview, he said, yeah, with he's independent, does all his own thing. He's like, I can remember knowing somebody on a label and they were like, no, you can't wear flip-flops at your shows. Like, you need to look like this or you need to look like that brand type of thing but and so where, ah, how do you make art work? How do you take away some of this struggle of these business people always kind of wanting to be rich from the art that other people are producing? Or now we're finally in a realm where some people are actually able to do their own thing and actually cut the corporations out, or you see a lot of things kind of fading away, these old models, like the way the music industry's changed, the way
But it's
comedy.
not necessarily easier for the artist. I mean, I don't think artists' lives are any
True,
easier just
because
because
now
they
they
have
got to
direct
do more.
access. Right. I mean, I can't recall if it was a client of mine or something I read. Like a record label is really just a constellation of people you would have had to hire yourself. Right. If you're an
Yep.
independent artist, you're going to have to hire someone to do your album art, to hire someone to do your marketing, have to hire someone to do distribution. A record label just happens to be a one-stop shop for all of those things. Right.
Yeah.
Is it better or worse? Depends on the case, depends on your financial situation, depends on your metrics. I don't know that people are like eager to make a quick buck off the backs of artists as much as everyone should get paid for their work. And if we don't pay artists and everyone involved, then the work can't continue.
Right.
I have to remind myself of that because, to a degree, my income is paid by clients who are artists and I know they are struggling.
Right.
But if we don't honor the work, people can't do the work. And honoring the work also means paying for the work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
I'm,
don't
I
think
also,
everybody's out to make a buck. I Not anymore. I think I probably used to, but I don't anymore. But having come from a healthcare administrative background, understanding that in order to sometimes live your dream, you have to approach it with a business like
right.
to make it, like you said, kind of sustainable. I mean, it's just the way it is, but it's kind of like a choose your hard. It's going to be hard conforming to a 9 to 5 that you don't agree with everything, but it's going to be equally as hard to um, balance, juggle business
Yeah.
and art. And uh, what you said that was really stuck out to me was this, you still have to respect your living is made off this, but you still have to respect the art. What does that
Yeah.
mean? What is that? Explain that feeling, meaning like what does respecting the art mean to you? If you're working with me and I'm an artist, what does that mean? How does that look?
Well, I said honor the work
Okay,
too.
honor the work.
But I think your question is just as valid and maybe more interesting to me. I think you have to honor the work by saying, like, I have, whether it's the artist, I have practiced drums for 25 years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I can do a paradiddle like nobody's business. I've put in the work. I ought to be paid for the results, the fruits of my labor.
Right.
Or, for me to honor the work that I have a perspective to bring to artists, that I have thought through the problems, that I've thought through the spiritual underpinnings of the arts making, that I've thought through the spiritual problems that artists face, and have some basket of techniques, skills, and wisdoms to offer them, whether they're my own knowledge or things from scripture or books I've read or artists I've worked with. I think respecting the work is a little different. And part of that is almost personifying the work, right? That an album has a life of its own, that a painting, it doesn't exist independently of the artist, but it is a child of the artist. And just as our children are not ours, the work is somehow its own thing, and somehow its own gift of God. God places within us the soul to make these things and the capacity and the drive. Mm-hmm. But the work is these embryos that grow into things that we can't conceive.
Gives us the pain to make the art.
Yeah.
The
but
pain,
not always,
the pain that's expressed, but sometimes the joy too.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be painful, but I think in the end, it's not ours. Rick Rubin talks about it in his book. Once you make the art, you are also an observer of the art. Once you put the painting out and it's on the gallery wall, you are a viewer just like anyone else. It is no longer exactly yours. And your opinion matters just as much as any other viewer or listener or observer or audience member. And I think when you talk about respect the art, what came up for me is this idea that the art is its own thing. Right? That, Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitar solo came through him and was of him, but now is ours, and now is living its own existence. Maybe it's in zeros and ones on a CD or a streaming service, but maybe it's its own idea that transcends.
It was in chills on me. Just thinking about some of the solos, watching Live from Macumbo. I can't tell you how many times on VHS, because during those kitchen guitar playing years, this was still the years of VHS, and we were too poor to have cable, so we watched VHS over and over and listened to music and played music. And yeah, Live at Macumbo, man, that was just the credibility of what he was and did, and magic. But I kind of want to, so we've talked a lot about meaning, and I have these ideas of where you are now, and sometimes feeling this similar experience of some of the things I've done practically and some of the life I lived, and how some of these things have translated into what I'm doing now. What caused you to leave the pulpit and then transition into this? And do you think that all this is kind of tied in to lead you to what you're doing now? Is this the most complete, balanced, fulfilled within your soul version? Do you feel like
yes,
all these things
that part I can answer. I mean, I think it's growing. I don't think it's done.
Right.
I don't think
I feel the same way.
To talk about my kids who were into Pokemon a few years ago. This is not the final form of this Pokemon, but it is the most complete, integrated version of me in a long time. I loved pulpit work for a long time. I was in a pulpit for 12 years, on and off. The first, yeah, on and off. The first several years were wonderful, and sometime around year 8, it just became less and less joyful, and COVID accelerated that. The things I loved were fewer. I was no longer holding people's hands.
And they took away art. Couldn't go see live shows. You couldn't do a lot of stuff.
But particular to pulpit experience, you weren't with people in the ways that mattered to me. And the board meetings became more contentious. Should we open up? Should we wear masks? What do we do when?
Was there ever a discussion of where does religion fall against, let's say, governmental defiance? Is
No,
that right?
that's not a Jewish concern.
Okay.
No, the protection of human life was all we were concerned about. I think we were taken unaware. I think it exposed in religious communities a lot of longstanding weaknesses, right? I had no idea that congregants would attend synagogues in New York City virtually, and that would be a meaningful experience to them. I thought, oh, they'll do it for fun. That's interesting, but it's not going to be meaningful to them. They're not going to join and become a member of a congregation in Los Angeles from Tennessee. And they did. And I think it just started to fracture the whole system. And we, at this particular synagogue I was in, we were having building issues, long overdue maintenance issues that we couldn't come to any sort of consensus about what to do with. And I think the institution needed radical change. And I pushed for some of that. And then there was some pushback. And I realized that to do what I wanted to do, I had to do it on my own. I would have liked to do it in the same place. It wasn't an option. And I'm very happy to be my boss and to structure things the way I see them. But what did you say? It's a choice of hard, right? Like, board meetings and committee meetings were miserable, but being a solo practitioner is miserable in a new way, right? It's you're constantly different on yourself.
Yeah. I can remember. I mean, I don't get the 2 a.m. phone calls that I used to get when a doctor calls in, but things come up that so I'm part of a podcast connection network. Somebody seeked me out, and the founder, we have meetings every Monday, but the founder happened to be 2.5 hours away from me. And it was a last minute decision to drop what I was doing and go spend the entire day with a person I've had a connection with for 9 months, but in person, and nurture that connection. And I met other cool people and had great conversations. And, I got home, at 3:30 in the morning. I went to bed at like 4. I got up at 5:30 to pee. My daughter woke me up at 6:30 to, because she didn't see me last night. And it's been long, but it's I feel way more fulfilled. And even being tired a little bit, because I've only had like 2 hours and 40 minutes of sleep.
That's rough.
And like 4 hours the 2 previous nights, but I still feel like I'm enjoying our conversation. I'm enjoying connecting and seeing the parallels and understanding your point of view. And I don't think I ever performed in my corporate roles this well on the same amount of sleep. Maybe in the ER because it was required, but that's kind of a muscle memory response type of thing. And the interest, the craziness kind of keeps it interesting. But within the other years, when you're part of committees and leaderships and meetings and asking people for money for things that need to be done, somewhere the meaning goes away. But I dealt with mine poorly. I ended up, once I got laid off and I had a decent severance package and stuff, but there was some point when I didn't know I wasn't supposed to go back into healthcare until I applied to 300 jobs over 3 years and turned some down and didn't get others, and was like, I just need to do my own thing. But it was kind of I went through a period of drinking alcohol a lot, and I quit over a year now. But how did you deal when you left? What did you have to reconcile with inside you? Was there a depression somewhere in between making the decision, even though it's the right thing to do?
It wasn't a dip. No, I mean, I when I left the synagogue, I needed a lot less Prozac. I think there was a lot of unacknowledged grief. It was a cornerstone of my life for 12 years. To be a community rabbi was something I'd always wanted. I was probably pretty good at it.
When I say as servers, because I go as caregivers, servers, caretakers, nurture. I don't know
Yeah,
what it is. I used to always tell my people it's not who we are. It's not what we do, it's who we are.
it
And
can
so
be.
there's an identity, like I
Right.
lost my identity. My true identity is I'm a kind, caring, and compassionate person. How I choose to do it is the difference. I thought what I was doing was my identity, just like maybe being a rabbi. What you were
I
doing was
still
the
think of
identity.
myself, being a rabbi is core to my identity.
Right.
There are a lot of people doing things like what I do that call themselves coaches or consultants, and those are adequate, but I'm still a rabbi to the artists and others with whom I work. I think there was a lot of unacknowledged grief of, I think it's hard to let go of something you're actually good at.
True.
Like,
Sometimes, well, you always do what you're good at
right. I
because
mean,
you're
I
good
didn't,
at
I
it.
didn't leave because I messed it up. I left because I couldn't do enough of it, enough of what I really wanted to do there. And I was tired and needed to change. And there was burnout and all these other local sort
Yeah.
of proximate causes. And then sort of in a religious life, in a helping profession, especially to a religious life, your whole religious identity is already defined for you by virtue of the pulpit. And so re-understanding myself as a religious and spiritual person without preconditions is still a challenge I'm enduring right now. It's
That's
still
why
a
I said
challenge.
my faith was strong, but there was a lot of hesitation that would make it sound like it wasn't because I'm trying to align all these different things that I've known from such a young age, kind of like what you're describing. I'm like,
So I have a question before we run out of time. Um, you mentioned the idea of like living. I think you said live as the person you would like to meet.
yeah,
What
or
is that?
go out and be the person you want to meet.
What is that in your life right now? How do you express that in your life right now? What are you working towards with that in mind?
Um, I, especially when I Uber Eats, I try to be the kindest, best person to whoever's helping me, like when I'm picking up an order, a hostess, a bartender, whatever. I understand I might be the one smile, the one good thing they need that day that they can be like, oh man, he was really cool, or he was really nice, or whatever, or he enlightened me. So that's kind of like a component of it with what I do, whether it's through podcasting, through posting, through engaging. Um, I I try to be the true me of understanding and try to see what's truly going on, offer grace and encouragement, not be an a-hole on the internet who's just tearing people down. And it's those but the hardest part of that too, and just coming to myself with this is like, I have to understand I got to be that same person to myself. The same grace I show others, I need to show myself more so than others because I was irritated with someone the other day who was not very graceful with me when I made a mistake and I owned it and apologized and they just weren't graceful and they're in a very helping profession and it just and I had to sit there and go, what am I learning from it? What's the real rub? Is just that it's not aligned. Is like, how can you say that you truly want what's best for others and then maybe assume the worst and not offer any grace from somebody just made a mistake. It happens, and they owned up to it. And um, you know, being being a dick about it is not making it any better. And I can't believe that your profession is to help people. Um, so that's the,
That's the person you want to meet.
yeah, and
Compassion, grace, patience.
yeah, yeah. understanding, somebody who's just,
Good nature. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think if we all, you know, then we'd all be more approachable. And then, it like that chain reaction of how, I don't know, I'm utopian, idealist, and maybe it's that strong core religious God belief, whatever you want to call it, spiritual thing that I just believe good is better than evil. Good will win over evil. I don't know how we're going to do it. This is my little piece, my little part, my little saying, my little encouragement, my little way to contribute to it. And if enough people contribute, I think we can make it happen. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what it means to me. But I think if everybody, it begins in the mindset. People have to want that, and
Yeah.
and that's what's so interesting, and what I love about this conversation and kind of the idea and the topic is there's this very kind of when you look at like religion and you think about money and greed and business aspect, and then there's this thing that's straight from the heart that's totally artistic, but that is almost symbolically sometimes associated with devilish things of sex, drugs, and rock and roll and these people. And um, so it's like the things they tell you in scripture, like don't be about greed and this, and then don't be about sin and uh, how they kind of come together, and it's it's wild. Um, but I don't know, in your work, what you do now, because I talk a lot about mental health, and I know that, I think I think some of the conditions of our spirit and soul being out of a line when you knew you needed to leave cause a little depression, mental health issue, which kind of brings it down. Um, and then part of straightening that out is realigning your spirit, reconnecting with it, because I was taking antidepressants when I was in my last probably 3 or 4 years of leadership, and I realized I felt flat. I only felt anger. I didn't feel feelings. The feelings of love I wanted to feel towards my wife and daughter, only glimpses, but they weren't anything I could hold on to like I could now. And I made the choice to get off antidepressants, and I cried a lot, but at least I knew I was feeling. And I cried a lot at commercials and underdog stories and things like that. But, you know, with the work you do now, how do you is is one kind of a, you know, is the I don't know, is the mental anguish and depression and things that people feel, is the art the expression of that, or is it the pursuit of that that causes the mental health part? And with the work you do now and helping people and having gone through some of these things yourself, how are art, mental health, do you think they're related? Do you think one causes the other, or one's an expression of the
I
other,
think
one's a relief of the
sensitive
other?
people make art, and sensitive people can be attuned to things that are depressing or despairing,
Yeah, I
and might
agree.
medicate themselves with alcohol and other drugs. I think for me, you can't heal mental wounds or psychological wounds with art, but art can be energizing
Hmm.
and a place to process challenge, pain, sorrow, joy. I think if you're doing what you are aligned to do, what is in line with your soul and calling and best self, there'll be a lot less distress. But I don't know if that's a substitute for treating biological depression or bipolarity or
Right.
schizophrenia. I don't think that can do it.
No, I don't either. I know,
Yeah.
because I
I'm
mean
not
they have,
suggesting that's what you're saying. I'm just thinking I,
no,
I want to be clear with people who are
yeah,
listening.
because they do have art therapy, music therapy. So like
Right.
I think like what you said about it's kind of like a tool,
It's a
uh
tool.
a way to maybe express some of the pain. But
Yeah.
kind of what I was getting at was what you said before is I think it was a thought I had before we even started the conversation when I was looking at your profile of going, what is it about the sensitive people, the art, that they kind of go hand in hand and that you see a lot of this. But do you think sometimes the psychological, I don't want to call it despair, but you always say that the brilliancy of the mind of some people that kind of have levels of distress throughout their life who can create these things, um, you know, are they kind of I
I don't
don't
know. I mean, John Mulaney has this talk about Robin Williams. So,
Mhm.
people want to make this case that depression leads to great comedy. And he says he knows lots of people who are depressed that don't have the decency to make good jokes, right? Like yes, they can be connected or they cannot be connected. I think, and I don't think the making, the creativity, the art salves or solves depression, mental anguish. It doesn't usually hurt, and it can be an avenue through which we find healing.
Is
But
psychological distress just in alignment of the soul? Because you said
I
something
would,
about the
I
soul
think
at the
that's pretty
beginning.
close. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
what I was saying was I feel like coming back in alignment to true purpose, which I feel you leaving the pulpit, pursuing your current endeavors, you said you feel more fulfilled and aligned. And so alignment, psychological, um, yeah, that's very hand in hand, I think. I mean, is it all about alignment? Okay. All right.
Yeah,
As
I think
we
so.
one thing I like to ask everybody is since going on to this since leaving the pulpit, pursuing this journey, I like to know what's one thing that has turned out that you're really enjoying that you never would have anticipated had you not made this move, whether it's something fulfilling, something that's happened, someone you've met, maybe more time with your kids,
I mean, I
like that.
think, yeah, lots of things. People and institutions I've connected with,
Hmm.
um, psychedelic experiences, learning new music and art, learning new things about myself, um, learning about how to run a business, just new skills. I've always wanted to play drums, and it was only in a conversation with some clients at a salon we had that I kind of committed to it and finally took lessons, and it's been
Wow.
an extreme joy.
You never thought you would
Um,
be doing this when you went into the pulpit? Did you think you would be doing that forever?
I had an experience of doing this in seminary at training at a drug and alcohol rehab,
Uh-huh.
but at that point, couldn't conceive of how to make that into a career.
Right.
Right, of counseling an artist through spiritual means to help him achieve and expand his arts making. I didn't see how that could be a full-time job. And it probably couldn't have been before Zoom and the pandemic,
Right.
where, I
Yeah.
can work with people in Texas and LA, Boston, Vancouver.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, I'm very fortunate. I think the other thing that I'm working on now is to take this piece of me and bring it home to my family. You were kind of hinting at that. Like, I can be this really sweet person to clients, and I want to have that same grace and patience and compassion with my kids and wife.
Yeah.
People, and I think you're sort of hinting at it towards the end of your work in the hospital work, is like people in helping professions can leave it all at work and come home and be miserable to everyone around them. And I don't want to do that anymore. I'm really
Me
working
either.
on that. That's my current project, is to bring this person with me when I leave my office and go to the rest. I'm at a home office to go to the rest of the house.
Yeah. Same way. But all right. You asked me quite a few questions. I always give people the opportunity to ask me any question they want towards the end of the discussion, so you can ask one. But outside of that, before we do hop off, it's that time of the day where I know my daughter's about to be getting out of school and I have to work on a school project with her and math homework is due tomorrow and um And, like I said, I spent all day away from my wife and daughter yesterday, so I didn't get any of that family time. But, they were gracious enough to be understanding enough to know that, hey, this last minute opportunity came up that was a
It's very cool. Yeah.
connecting purpose for me, and for me to go ahead and take advantage of that. And, given my current circumstances, not being in corporate, allowed me to do that. And that's what I'm very grateful for. That flexibility to be able to be the person I want to be, wear the clothes I want to wear, have a man bun, and have my tattoos, and not have to cover them up, and just be the truest version of me. But anything you want to say to the audience before we go, and anything you want to plug?
Please be in touch. My website is eclecticcleric.com. And if you want to connect, there's a link through eclecticcleric.com/consultations. Those initial consultations are free and delightful for me. Love meeting new people. You can find me on most social media at eclecticcleric, and stick around, ask me questions, reach out to me. I love meeting new people, supporting their artwork making, and learning about what they're working on. So,
yeah. Well, all that will be in the show notes. And it's been awesome.
Thanks for your
talking
time.
to you. Yeah, there's been so much there's so many parallels. It was a great
Thanks
meeting.
for your time.
Well, you have a great day.
You too.
Well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Let's go. Asteroid of fear.